I'm Carolyn Albright from Allentown, Pennsylvania.
And I'm Tom Albright from Allentown, Pennsylvania.
And you have a story that you would like to share that you think people should know about. Could you share that story with us?
We have a story about a member in our church. Our church is called Ripple. It's an inner city, urban church, and we'd like to tell Tony's story.
Tony was a friend of mine, and he was also the first person who came to our church from the city. Ripple began as a missional experiment as part of the Mennonite Church USA Franconia Conference. And we had moved from the country, the suburbs, into the city. And people came with us in this church plant. And one cold January evening, we meet at 4 o'clock, and we had a knock on the door of the coffee shop where we were meeting in downtown Allentown. And Tony and his friend came to the door and said, "Could we come in?" And we said, "Of course you can come in. This is God's house. You're welcome here." And Tony and Stella came in, sat down and joined us in the service, got a cup of coffee and a donut. And after the service, Tony came up to us, and I remember he said, "Would you do a home visit?" And I said, "Of course I'd do a pastoral home visit." And he said, "Would you visit someone under a bridge?" And I said, "Of course I will." And the next day, with some fear and trembling, I went down under the 8th Street Bridge to meet Tony and his friends down there who were living there in the winter. This was January. It was very cold, and they also talked to you and had a request that night.
They had asked, I thought they were going to ask to come home and live with us or something, or ask us for money. But their simple request was, could we have a blanket and a candle? So we took them back to our house, gave them a blanket and a candle, and the next day Tom made his first visit to the homeless camp.
And so there was about maybe 8 people living down there during the winter. And Tony started coming to Ripple every Sunday at 4 o'clock. And he started bringing friends. And at Ripple Church, we realized that a lot of the people in the city didn't have access to Facebook or computers or websites. So we were making little business cards that told when our services would be. And more people started coming to our church. And we realized that Tony was handing out these cards that he would pick up on Sunday. And we knew that Tony his gift was an evangelist, and he would go around the city, and I said, "Tony, how are you getting all these people to come to Ripple?" And he said, "I just tell them, you've got to come and see." And he hands them a card. And so Ripple Church really began at that point with the people, incarnationally, with the people who were living in the city, from Tony inviting his friends who were on the margins of society. And he kept inviting, and Tony kept coming. But he would have times when he would be away for a while and times when he would come. His life was not easy. He shared with us more of his story as we got to know him more. His life was tough. He came from Florida as an itinerant farmer or farm worker to pick fruit up in some of the fields surrounding the Lehigh Valley. And he made his way to Allentown and found friends and
also was involved with some addiction, had spent some time in and out of prison.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of 2015, we hadn't seen Tony for a long while, and we mentioned it to each other. And then one day in mid-March, he showed up at our door. Yeah. And we said, "Tony, where have you been?" And he said, "Well, I just got out of prison, but I'm turning my life around. I'm coming back to Ripple." Yeah. He had lunch with us. We gave him a card.
Yeah, but Tony, it wasn't unusual. Tony would disappear for a while and come back, but Tony would come to our family. We considered him part of our family, and he would say that. He spent Christmas with us 2 years before that. And so Tony said to us that Sunday, it was a Sunday afternoon before church, he showed up at our house. And we talked to him about how he was doing. He said he had a place to live. He was living a few blocks down at a woman's house where he had a room. And he said, "I lost your card. I lost everything." Because that happens a lot when people are in prison. They have a room, but once they don't show up and pay their bill for a week or two, they can just throw everything out. So Tony lost everything. So before Tony left that day and walked over to church, we gave him a card with my name on it and our phone, because he had lost our phone number. So he had his phone number. And I still remember when Tony left our house that afternoon after lunch. And I said, Tony, I love you. And Tony said, we're family.
And later that week, Tom got a phone call at work that was very disturbing.
Well, he came to church, and it was like this great reunion because people hadn't seen Tony, and a lot of people are at Ripple because of Tony. He was really a leader of people on the margins, and so it was an exciting day at church because he gave testimony about what God was doing in his life and how his life, he was turning around. He'd been clean for quite some time, and
several other people asked if he had a place to stay that night, and he assured them that yes, he did. And
so on Friday afternoon, I got a phone call from the hospital asking if I would come identify a body. And of course I said, who is it? And they said, we can't tell you. And I went to the hospital, but on the way to the hospital, I was thinking, I knew I gave Tony that card. And I got to the emergency room and identified Tony's body. It was Tony. He had been crushed because he had slept in a dumpster the night before. It was very cold that night. We don't know why Tony didn't sleep where we thought he was sleeping. Maybe he had a lot of pride and respect, and we wanted to, honor that too. We realized we don't know all of anyone's story, just like no one knows all of our story. And so Tony that night had slept in a dumpster, and early in the morning, about 5:30, 6 o'clock, they came to empty the can about 2 blocks from where our church is, and Tony was crushed. They heard his screams when they got to the next stop. He hadn't died. And Tony was taken to the hospital, but he didn't make it. It was one of the hardest things that I had to do as a pastor and as a friend, and was to see Tony there. But I got to spend time, I prayed there. The nurses and doctors who cared for him did their best, but they couldn't bring him back. And
so about a week later, we had Tony's funeral at Ripple, and probably close to 300 people showed up.
From the community, everyone from the mayor's office to homeless friends.
His friends on the street, yeah.
And it brought the community, our community, together because that was the kind of person Tony was. And people just wanted to speak. The service just went on. Carolyn was supposed to give the message, and she ended up not being able to.
Yeah, because so many other people gave kind of the same message. Really good testimony to Tony's witness of Christ on the street and to his friends.
Tony had told me that his stepfather in Florida was a minister. And I said, Tony, I can tell, God is still calling you into ministry. And what he was doing on the street really was street ministry. And, we don't want his death to be in vain. And one of the miracles, I believe it was a miracle that happened at this funeral service, was we had asked a few people, so many people wanted to speak that we had to limit it. And we limited it to like 5 people. And one was one of his friends from the street. And he came up to me during the service and said, could I have a few of my friends come up with me? I was like, yes, of course. And he went up there to speak, and he said, I want the friends of Tony to come up front. And a number of us came up, but 40 or 50, mostly men, some women, from the street came up, and they shared a song for Tony they'd written, they shared a poem, and they shared a beautiful eulogy for Tony. And then these people sat back down, and I feel that Tony was honored and respected in the way that we were able to honor him in that memorial service. And
we still are honoring him we've made a mural, and people can add to the mural remembering people at Ripple who have died. We've had a few other deaths as well. And just the way that people continue to grieve and to share, and I think it has opened up a way for people to do that in a deeper way. Tony's memory still goes on. I'm still grieving
Tony's death, because he really was a friend. But one of the things that's happened is we've had people come up to us since his funeral and say, you know, I realize that my life on the street may not have long. And could we tell you our requests? Because we want you to honor other people who could die, including, you know, a woman who just talked to us recently about she doesn't know how long she has to live. And she said, I want a memorial service, a service of celebration, just like Tony's. And so Tony, one of the other things that's happening is that his legacy goes on because a group of us is meeting regularly to plan for this winter so that doesn't happen. You know, there's no reason that people should be dying on our streets in dumpsters on cold nights. So we have a group, we're meeting next week in the mayor's conference room to talk about how we're going to prepare for this winter so that others don't have to die in dumpsters, so that there's care, there's supports in the community.
But Tony's faith made a lot of ripple in our community, and we're grateful for that.
Why do you think it's important to share this story, especially with this church community?
So that people know they have a place to belong, that they're loved and cared about, even in dire situations.
And I believe that this isn't, I believe there's many more people in the cultures, not just in the American culture, but around the world, in our different nations and states, who are struggling for life, who are hanging on by a thread. And I don't know that we know that. People, you know, good people who are in church who say, you know, I'm worshiping God on Sunday, but we don't realize that there's people dying in the streets on Friday and Mondays. And how do we connect the life and worship of the church, the call for the Great Commission for us to be disciples of Christ, to our actions? And I think that this was a call for people to realize that we need to be doing even more. And I believe there was more we could do. I mean, I still feel guilt. I wish that Tony had said, if he didn't have a place, that he would have told me, and we could have let him sleep there. We could have let him sleep with us. We could have helped him find a place, but that was the situation. And that was Tony's life. And like I said, he was the first to walk in those ripple doors. A number of us had come from the suburban church, and we're coming down and we're driving into the city. We lived there, but a lot of our friends who were part of Ripple at the time drove into the city. And then a shift started to happen as more and more people from the margins started coming. It seemed like we had fewer people coming from the suburbs.
Just that we named our church Ripple because of the way that Jesus teaches us that acts of love ripple out in ways that you don't know where they're going to reach.
Yeah. Well, we say Jesus is our center and we need each other. And we believe those two things very strongly. We're very centered on Christ, but we're very understanding that we need each other. And that's not to say that we do. Sometimes when people want to help, they do things to people or for people. And a lot of good supportive agencies do things for people. But we really try to do things with people to preserve dignity and care and that Christ-like atmosphere, that they are leaders. The people who come up, who are in really difficult places in a lot of areas of their lives, are leaders at Ripple. And I think that's good. The church belongs to the community, belongs to the people.